Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Ask Sharifah. As always, we're going to have some fun today, but we're also going to learn and we're going to share information. And so, as always, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to share this interview because friends don't let friends miss out on Ask Sharifah. So since this interview is live with our guests, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please go ahead and ask them in the comment section. So I'm going to go ahead and bring on our guest, Mrs. Deloria Nelson. And Mrs. Nelson is the president of Authentic Culture and Engagement Solutions. Good afternoon, Deloria. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
I am so wonderful. I'm so excited to be able to speak with you. We're going to see if people have questions, if they don't have questions, if they have comments. But the most beautiful thing is that I always have questions. I always have comments. And people are just now starting to join us in the chat room. I want to go ahead and say good morning to Connie. Connie's in the chat room. Connie, we want to make sure again that we share this live because we are live with Deloria Nelson. So, okay, what interested you, Deloria, in culture and working with people in regards to culture?
Well, I've had the fortune of working for some really great corporations with good cultures. One was Walt Disney World, and most recently, Charles Schwab. And I think culture is fascinating because culture is the fiber of the company. It's what makes people stay. It's what makes people want to leave. And I think people don't understand how important that is. And culture is more than a sign on the wall. I look at your sign, it says work out, train the pain. All right, that's kind of a hint I need to do that, but I digress. It's how people treat people. It's how people interact. And I've worked at places where you had these platitudes on the wall, but that really wasn't the way that people engaged and employees engaged. And when that works, your culture isn't real. And so, I thought about authenticity because of one of my brands is being authentic. I don't really know how to be anybody other than myself. And so I have found if you really want your culture to transcend and you want to enhance the engagement of your employees, start by being authentic. Because if you start with the truth and you're transparent and vulnerable and real, then you can create the kind of corporate culture where your turnover is low and people really want to stay.
That's excellent. You made an excellent point. One of the things that you mentioned the plaque or the sign on the wall and what it says. And so I'm going to go ahead and equate this to what companies consider their employee manual. And so you'll find in corporate America that companies absolutely know that they should have an employee manual. They create the employee manual, they write the employee manual, they take a lot of time, energy, and effort to come up with this employee manual. And you think it has all these wonderful things. We don't discriminate. We're going to pay you this time. You have this amount of vacation days, so much information. And then when you start to work for the company, especially after a few months, you begin to realize that despite what it says in the employee manual, their culture may be completely different. So you have to learn a company's culture as opposed to just what they say they do. Is Absolutely. That correct? Would you agree?
Absolutely. And you really want to, if possible, get to know people that work there because people will be very transparent about what the culture is. And unfortunately or fortunately, there are a lot of unwritten rules. And a lot of times if a person is coming right into the company and naive, they don't understand it. The other thing that I think is tough, and we need so much more training for the leaders or first line leaders, is people are only as good as the leaders. They say all the time, people don't leave companies, they leave their managers. And imperfect managers make it hard for some employees. And it's not about being perfect, but it's about being transparent. So one of the things companies really need to do is invest more time in training their first line leaders, because that's the company to the person. The person that comes in that may never meet the CEO, their impression of company XYZ is all about how their direct leader treats them.
What are some of the ways that you recommend as far as researching a company? I think nowadays when we're going to start work for a company, we look at things like the online reviews, which can also be changed or not necessarily changed, but we always want to go out and put our best foot forward. So that's still not going to give you an exact idea. What are some of the ways that you recommend to research the culture of the company?
Right. It depends on what you're looking for, but definitely, of course, you would go to the website. But it's like everything else, it's advertising, right? So they're going to show you their best foot forward. from a diversity and inclusion perspective, if there are not many diverse people on the website, that's a sign. Because in 2019, people understand that diversity is important and they should definitely try to have that representation. But the reality is you can't create what you don't have. And if you have stock photos, that's one thing. But I would say go look at the board of directors, look at the actual leaders. So it gives you an idea of where they are on the diversity continuum. Talk to people I think Glassdoor gives you a little hint, but the reality is more displeased people write things than the people that are pleased. So a lot of times you may see more negative things than you do positive things, but try to talk to people. If they're having a career fair, go to the career fair, get to know people that have worked for the company, because most people will be transparent about their time there.
One of the things that you mentioned is about the managers and how people feel about the managers. There has also been said recently, and this is, again, I'm asking your opinion on it, is that where we are in society, employees don't expect to have longevity. So some people feel that there's nothing the company can do, nothing the leaders can do in order to increase that. Because there used to be a time where if you worked for a company, you stay there for 25 years, you got the golden parachute, you got the retirement, the golden pen, so much. But now, for people to work at a company, it may be 2 years, 5 years, and they don't expect to retire from one company. What are your thoughts on that, Deloria?
I think that's the reality of 2019. And people have learned based on watching their parents and watching their friends that things are not the same as they were. But it doesn't mean that you can't make a huge impact while you're there. So I think most people go planning to learn and contribute. There's an old saying that says fair exchange is no robbery. So if you go with the intent of contributing and learning, and it's great, you stay longer. And there's always a season for everything. So sometimes you go, you've learned all you can, you've been promoted, you've made great friends and colleagues, and you move on. But the longevity is not there as much as it used to be. Some of it is, sometimes I think millennials get a bad name. It's not just that. Sometimes people want lots of experiences. The other thing you can do is go to a company that's larger or that primarily promotes from within. Then that way you can move around a lot. I know for me, when I was at Disney, I was there 10 years, but I had 7 jobs. And for someone that's high energy that likes change like me, that was great, because even though I had the 401k and the longevity, I learned about so many different business units because I did so many things. So I think you go and you contribute and you'll know when it's time to go. And I think good leaders will be transparent with you about your opportunities to grow. Sometimes it's lateral, but as long as you're giving and being creative and being impactful while you're there, whether it's, to be honest, someone's authentic 2 years, it may be better than someone's apathetic 10.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. One of the things that happened with me on my journey is I was laid off over 7 times. And It always seemed to happen around that 6-month mark. And through the process, especially in the beginning, I felt like, oh my God, I'll never be able to get a job. This is, it just did a lot for me mentally. But then one time I went to do an interview, and the person doing the interview looked at my resume, and it's like, wow, Sharifah, you have the resume of an engineer. Because I had worked at so many different companies and so many different positions and titles and roles, I had developed a diverse skill set. And so I started to look at it as a positive. And even now, working self-employed, having my own company from Ask Sharifah to In the News PR, my PR firm, I draw on all those skills. I draw on when I was working for the company and I was learning how to do Google AdWords, working for this other company, learning how to do a correct press release. There were so many things I learned from going from different positions, and I was definitely authentic. That's why another thing that I tell people is that I was employee of the month. I had, perfect attendance awards, and then all of a sudden I'm laid off. Right. So all those things I bring with me. What are some of the ways that you feel that companies can benefit from, having authentic employees, even though those employees may not necessarily, like you said, be there for 10 years?
Well, you don't get blindsided. I mean, from an inclusion and diversity perspective, and my last role was leader of diversity and inclusion for Charles Schwab. And when you see all of these inclusion faux pas, you see of things that happened at Starbucks, and then you see things with Gucci and Prada, the blackface and all of these things, and you say to yourself, one of three things: either they didn't have diversity at the decision-making table, they did have diversity, but they didn't foster authenticity and honesty, or the person just wasn't comfortable pointing things out. If you have people that are authentic and you foster that culture, people are going to say, I think that's a bad idea. And I think you would much rather hear that internally as opposed to externally when your brand is then damaged and then you have to go back. So a lot of it is allowing people to be themselves, letting people make mistakes, and not giving people negative vibes from being authentic about something that you didn't see. I remember working for a company one time, and it wasn't funny, but it was kind of telling. I mean, it was probably probably like 9 or 10 years ago. And we were doing like a commercial for the organization. And so it was an organization, it was in hospitality. And so people would come and go. And, it was pretty diverse, our clientele. But the leadership team wasn't diverse with the exception of myself. And so when the marketing person said, oh, great, they're coming to tape today and whatever, I said, I hope that we have diverse models. And he was like, well, that's not really my issue. And, I just told them. And then I said, no. It's all of our issue because we want to reflect and represent who's there. Well, needless to say, when the models showed up, they weren't diverse at all. I walked across the street to Chuck E. Cheese and found some diverse models and offered them some free tickets to be in the commercial. And people laughed, but it has to be everybody's thing. And when everybody develops that lens, we'll all be better. It shouldn't just be the people of color pointing out there are no people of color. It shouldn't just be the women pointing out that there are no women. Everybody should have that lens because the culture and the company and the country that we live in is very diverse. And to me, when you try not to see it, that's when you get into trouble. And yes, things are evolving, but you have to evolve your mindset. I do a really innovative and fun session on inclusive leadership because inclusive leadership is critical. And if you cannot lead inclusively, you will get left behind and you won't have the innovation that the companies need to stay relevant.
I think that is key. Again, if you are just now tuning in, we are live with Mrs. Deloria Nelson. This has been an interesting conversation, but we have so much more to cover. So I just wanted to say good morning to Connie, Eunice, Queen, Anthony, Moses, Jerry, Marie, so many people in the chat room, Roderick. If you have any questions or comments, we invite you to join the conversation. We are discussing culture as well as inclusion. And if you haven't shared this video, please go ahead and share this video because we don't want your friends to miss out on this information. And I'll go ahead and ask any questions that you have for Mrs. Deloria Nelson. But one of the things that you said that I thought was very powerful, Deloria, is inclusion. And that seems to be like the catchphrase, buzz phrase for now, because that term, and again, this is your area of expertise, so correct me if I'm wrong, is to a certain extent fairly new. Before, we kind of tended to go with just simply, diversity. Let's be, we want to be, but now it's like, it's not just about the diversity, it's about inclusion. Are we including everything?
Right.
And being in entertainment, when I watch the Oscars now, when I watch the Emmys now, there is a huge push for entertainment as well as advertisers to have inclusion. So as you begin to watch television, and I was watching some commercial yesterday, I don't even know what it was, but they were talking about some college or university and how you can get the best education here. And they were showing different people. And I was like, where is the Black person? Like, I just wanted to, and then all of a sudden, there he was, Black man. I was like, because they get it. People are really starting to get it that if you want to have a message and you want people to hear your message, it has to be a message for everyone. And I definitely know this. Some of our viewers, I'm pretty sure they know it as well, but Charles Schwab is not known for their diversity, for history. They're not one of those companies that you think of as diverse and inclusive. I mean, that's not a knock against them. That's not a negative.
No, it's true. And I'll tell you, it was funny when I joined because I actually didn't know anybody there. I just, saw the ad and I thought, okay, I could do that. It was in employee relations, which was my expertise. and I applied. And I will tell you, I was pleasantly surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was like a unicorn in the land of horses, right? I mean, I have locks, you know, and I'm not super conservative. So I was like, I don't know how this is going to go, but I can only be me. And I will tell you, I was pleasantly surprised at how welcomed and embraced I was.
Mm-hmm.
And so the company is a lot more diverse than you would think. I mean, once again, you do. Stereotypically, you think financial services, oh, white men, right? That's what you think.
Right.
But it's more than that, and it's definitely evolving. Like any company, there's still ways to go, but they're realizing the importance of women. I mean, if you think about wealth, fortunately or unfortunately, women outlive men, right? And so they realize that a lot of time if the financial consultant was only dealing with the husband and kind of not including the wife, when he died, the wife would often go to a different financial consulting firm because they didn't build a relationship. So I think it's an evolution, and we definitely need a lot more African Americans, Hispanics in financial services. And really, it's because one of the biggest divides we have is the socioeconomic divide. And the one thing I will say I learned there was a lot about financial fitness and trying to close that wealth gap. And a lot of it is about consumerism and, you know, what do you invest in? People laugh, but I'm very authentic and I'm very frugal because I'm not investing in something that's not going to grow. You know, where are they? I got dollar store nails, right? You know, talk about being authentic, because I thought about it the other day, and the young lady that does my hair was like, she uses them. I'm thinking her hands are in water. And I thought, you know, I'm paying $60 a month to do my nails when I can go to Dollar Tree and get them for $1. I mean, that's the millionaire mindset. And for us to change the wealth gap, which is what prevents some opportunities, we have to start thinking about what are we investing in? And it should matter. I mean, I'll never buy a new car. So a lot of the things I learned, a lot of people that have wealth, they don't look like they have wealth because they're not flossing. They're not buying the Gucci and the Prada. They're in a Toyota Camry. And so we as African Americans and Hispanics, we have to learn how to really create things. And for me, it's about creating generational wealth. I mean, my mom has made a lot of sacrifices, and I want to do the same thing. And it's not going to be by just consumerism. It's about saving. It's about investing. And I really think that is what's going to help with the gap. So I would say Charles Schwab had a great culture of, you know, you don't think of them as diversity. You don't. But there is diversity there, and we need more, not just to enhance the brand, but to enhance our community and learn that financial fitness so we can start teaching what's important, so we can create the new millionaires that will be able to invest and help our communities.
No, I completely agree. One of my main focuses is creating that generational wealth. And it's wealth, obviously, that you can pass on from generations to generations. But part of that wealth is being able to make sure, this is one of the most important things for me. Right now, I don't have grandkids. You know, God willing, I will have some, you know, maybe 5-10 years. My kids are still in their early 20s. But I want to make sure my grandchildren's college education is paid for. Like, that is one of my driving forces. You know, why I focus on being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, you know, creating different, because I want them to come out of high school with the only decision it being what career, and they'll make it long before, like, what career, but not, you know, can I afford it, or what, you know, college can I afford? And so I agree with you completely on generational wealth and us being able to create generational wealth.
Absolutely. It's so important. And I think I learned a lot about that. And once again, I tell people, don't be somewhere and not learn it. If you're in an environment where you have access to free financial consultants, take advantage of all of that and pay attention to how people that have wealth, pay attention to how they live and what they don't do. And I mean, my mom has been amazing in that regard. And she paid for her grandchildren's, my children, college. And so the bar is set high for me, right? Because I have granddaughters now, twin granddaughters that are 5, and I'm feeling like, you know, every generation should do better. So that is the same thing now that I'm thinking I have to figure it out, and we just have to keep teaching and learning. And so, you know, inclusion, and it's also really about entrepreneurship, right? And you can do both. I mean, multiple streams of income. I'm not advising quit your job. You know your situation, but even if you have that job, what are you building? What are you passionate about that can bring in multiple sources of income? Because to your point, these are great corporations, but when they crunch the numbers and they're looking at their returns and their expenses, they can decide tomorrow to lay you off. And if you don't have multiple streams of income, all of a sudden you're aghast. And so for me, I've had that mindset because my mom definitely, she was one of these people that always wanted to be in a position that if a job was lost, she would be okay. And so I've learned a lot from her. Still there, it's a journey, but create multiple sources of income. And nowadays there's so many ways to do it. Don't be afraid to step out on faith. You got the internet, so now you have a global community. I mean, you think about how well you've done. You just got to have the faith to step out. Everybody has a gift. Use that gift and don't be afraid.
I agree. I'm telling you, rocking it right here, Miss Deloria Nelson. If you're just now joining us in the chat room, I want to say good morning to Charles, to Tina, to Elizabeth. We are live. If you have any questions, comments, please ask them in the comment section. I'll read those to Deloria. But we're discussing inclusion. We're discussing generational wealth, so much culture of a company going on. But you are absolutely, absolutely correct. That's one of the reasons why I just released my second book, which is Signs You Might Be an Entrepreneur, How to Discover the Entrepreneur in You. But I did that because people always ask me what people believe is that, and this is an honest belief, is that there's that one business that all of a sudden, if you get in that business, automatically, instantaneously, you'll be a multimillionaire. And I always tell people, in 2019, you can Google any business. You can start from any business. You can sell or offer a million different things, but the one business that is guaranteed, and I use that term loosely, but guaranteed to be successful is the business you're going to do day in and day out. The one that you're going to commit to, the one you're going to focus on, and not just say, oh, okay, well, if you do this, then I'm going to be rich. No, nobody's ever done it that way. It's just focusing, building, focusing on your dream. So speaking of entrepreneurial, let's talk about your company and some of the things that you do, because with inclusion, and I want to talk about how you help with this, because what I've seen with inclusion and with culture is sometimes you'll start at a company and you realize that based on the culture, maybe they're used to only dealing with a certain type of person. Maybe there's the good old boys club and, all the good old boys always go here. They always do this. Is there an adjustment? How do you work with companies to get past that so everyone is included and everyone feels comfortable?
Right. I hope I'm not on mute because I was pushing buttons. You still hear me?
I'm here. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, but I was like pushing buttons.
No, it's fine. Did you want me to repeat the question? Or
please?
Okay. What I was saying is inclusion for some companies can be something that's so just ingrained. Like some companies, and this is just an example, not to knock it, but there's what they call the good old boys club. Because it's always that male and they do a certain things, maybe they only go golfing or maybe, some companies, especially overseas and international, they spend a lot of time at strip clubs, some, in other places of America. But how do you work with companies to kind of get past the exclusion and focus on ways to include?
Right. It's not easy because I think people become creatures of habit, right? And so if you're used to the good old boys network or whatever it is, behavioral change is hard and it takes practice. So a lot of it is understanding the business case, really showing leaders that when you have a diverse team, you're more profitable, you're more creative. And it's also, I've kind of come up with the term that says there's a lot of unconscious bias training. I'm looking at unintended consequences because a lot of times the intent is not to not hire the best person. The intent is to not have the best team, but people don't think about it. There's a book that talks about fast brain, slow brain. And when you're moving fast, you tend to do what's comfortable and what you're used to. There are a lot of studies that show you that if you have a diverse hiring team, then your diverse candidates do so much better. If you have a hiring team that everybody looks the same, they have the same background, it's going to be hard for diversity to come through. I really encourage teams to look at culture add as opposed to culture fit, right? Culture fit can be a code word. And a lot of this bias is systemic and you don't even realize it. But when people say culture fit, a lot of times they're thinking about the last person they hired. That person may happen to be an introvert that went to Purdue University, 6-foot white male football player. And he seems to be doing great. Now you got these leaders that are busy, they're just trying to fill their rec, and they meet somebody who is the opposite of everything that they just hired that fit. Their first thought may be like, oh, I don't think she'll fit. But she could be the rock star that they need, that have a skill set or strengths that they need. So a lot of it is really teaching leaders to understand their own biases, because we all have them, and then setting aside, slowing down, and thinking about what you need on your team and what's missing, as opposed to carbon copies.
Mm-hmm. So when you go into the company, what are some of the things? Do you set up sessions? Do you do seminars? How do you start that initial conversation with the company?
Sure. It's really a kind of an assessment conversation with whoever is bringing me in. Sometimes it's HR. Sometimes it can be a department head, and just kind of say, talk to me about where you are. And where you are on the diversity and inclusion continuum. Because the reality is some people are just beginning and some people are further ahead. So you have to start where you are. So if people are at the beginning, then what you probably create is going to be an introductory, help them to get comfortable and understanding the differences, really helping them to buy it. I mean, the reality is there's some people that go into diversity and inclusion training excited. Other people go as of they had to, right?
Right.
And they're thinking, oh boy, here we go again. And my thing is, it really doesn't matter why you're there, but if you're there, we want to create an experience where you learn something and you go, oh, wow, you know what? I didn't realize that. So I'm going to stop and think. I'm going to start being exposed to different people. A lot of it is people outside of work don't necessarily expose themselves to diverse people. You know, they talk about Sunday being the most segregated day and hours of the year because most people don't spend that time. Because the reality is when you start engaging and interacting with the other, whatever the other is it's a different religion, a different sex, you start realizing that we have more things in common than we have different. And you stop thinking that that person is the unusual one. And you start realizing, wow, I missed out a lot. And it's also about building those relationships, because if you can build relationships, you can ask questions and you can be more comfortable and learn about cultures. On the employee relations side, which is what I used to do, which is more as the EEOC investigations and discrimination investigations. A lot of what happens is because lack of relationship, and you're asking or you're saying things offensive because you don't have a relationship. Now, I'm not talking about the people that are just straight up racist and are discriminating. They'll get it in time because they're not going to change that behavior and they're going to mess up. I'm talking about the people that just don't know. Maybe they've never interacted with a Muslim, right? Maybe they've never interacted with someone of a different race. And so they have all of these preconceived notions. If we watch TV, stereotypes, all of that, and they don't realize that they're not interacting fairly with that person. A lot of the unconscious bias training will help to reveal to you where your biases are. And you have to know where you are to understand what you need to do to get out of that space.
Okay, Deloria, we do have a comment. Tammy says in the comment section, amen. I am a diversity trainer and your guest is right on. So she's definitely agreeing with you. Tammy, thank you for that comment.
Thanks, Tammy.
Anyone have any questions or comments, we are here to read them to Deloria. Now, we mentioned earlier some of the things that happened, like the Prada incident, the different incidents that happened. Do you come into those companies after this whole blow up and try to resolve that? And how is it that, because sometimes I don't always necessarily agree. It was one that I think it was the black mask with the sweater. And I don't think that they necessarily thought that they were trying to do blackface, but that was just me being a person who kind of gives.
Sometimes timing, right? Even if they weren't thinking about that, it happened at the same time that all these blackface instances were blowing up. 6 months or a year ago, people may not have noticed, or there may not have been any alignment, but the timing kind of had something to do with that.
Right, absolutely. So when you go in, how do you explain it to them? Because some instances are obvious where you're like, okay, what were you thinking? But you can't just as a professional go in and go, what were you thinking? So how do you make them understand that you can't do this, that this is unacceptable?
That's tough, because I think what happens initially is people go into defense mode, right? They're trying to minimize. They don't really want to talk about it. Then you have all these disclaimers because people are concerned about reputation, ego. I will tell you who did it best, Starbucks. When the whole thing happened at Starbucks, they owned it. Even when they were responding, I was looking at how people were responding. I was like, wow, who's responding? Because people were saying things like, ugh, I'm going to miss my coffee. It wasn't a big deal. Why are people tripping? And the people at Starbucks were saying, no, it is a big deal. We recognize that this happened at Starbucks, but it happens all over the world, and we want to be a part of the solution. I was like, go Starbucks, right? They really owned it. My goal, though, and I hope people are listening, is to get in before the blow up, right? It's to get in and to look at your processes, look at your marketing, and try to create savvy people that understand and create filters that everybody has. You don't have to be African American or Hispanic to understand what is appropriate and what isn't. It's about having that filter. And one way you begin having that filter is by participating with your employee resource groups. It was funny that one of my employee resource groups, our executive sponsor happened to be a white male. And it was for the African American group. But what I loved about it was he started seeing through the eyes. It was hilarious one day because he was, we always tease. He was an older white gentleman. He was from New York, not warm and fuzzy that you would think would have, the diversity thing. But he was someone who owned what he did. And I was in my office working one day and he came to the door and he said, Dee, and I said, what is it? He said, have you seen the new hire class? And I'm like, no. He's like, it's not diverse enough. I think I only saw one African American. I was like, woo, we don't because he had the filter, right? So it wasn't me, because often as a person of color in a diversity role, even though your job is to point it out, you feel conflicted sometimes because it feels like, oh boy, are people going to think it's my personal agenda? And that's why allyship is so important, because a lot of times there are people in the rooms that you can't get into. And whether it's fair or unfair, if they're saying how important it is, people go, oh, maybe it is. So my goal is to get in there in advance, but afterwards, to be honest, if you look at my website, it's www.asolutionsgroup.com. I do diversity crisis management. So if something did blow up, I would come in, talk to the CEO and kind of say, okay, what do we need to do to fix this? And the one thing you don't need to do is be defensive. It's just admit and correct, but not just correct just to say it, to actually do some work, some training. And also it's helping leaders to find their authentic diversity voice, right? There are some organizations that are more conservative than others, and the CEO puts out messages, but they're pretty, straight, and they're not very, I don't want to say flowery, but their style is different. Once again, you want to have an authentic voice. I'm not going to meet with the leader like that, and then they come out the next day sounding like Jesse Jackson, right? Nobody's going to believe it. So you have to find the authentic pieces in your own voice. And there are things that everybody has that they can find a way to hold on to inclusion, whether it's being an introvert, whether it's being an extrovert, whether they have a family member who is in another religion. You have to figure out what it is that drives you. And once you find that message, you can share it in a way that's authentic, and all of your employees get it. They believe you, and you don't have to be perfect. You can make some mistakes, because that also is authenticity. And so these are the things that we want leaders to do. But the one thing I want organizations to understand is silence is screaming loud. We are in a society now with the internet and all of this. You can't stay silent. You can't say, well, it's not really relevant. It is relevant. And a lot of times people want to say, oh, it's political, I don't want to get involved. People issues are not political issues. And just because you say it's political doesn't mean it's true. There was a study that Center for Talent Innovation did, and it was called really it was about racial impact at work. And, long ago they would say, oh, leave all of this outside the door, come to work and focus. You can't. I know, with the Black Lives Matter movement and with a lot of the things that were happening, people were coming to work just like all bottled up and all frustrated. And so a lot of smart companies have started courageous conversations, different chats to talk about it, because it is impacting people, and you need to create a forum where they can talk. The study also said that employees felt so much better about the companies that had an authentic voice, that cared and said something. Once again, you don't have to get into the debate. It could be something as simple like after Charlottesville of saying, we were so disappointed by what we saw over the weekend. We want you to know that when you come to company XYZ, you will always be respected and valued for who you are. Something that simple, but not saying anything, it makes people not feel so comfortable. And so that authenticity, that trust that you want to get all of the best from that person, it's going to diminish because they're thinking, wow, I'm going through all of this because that impacted me, and everyone's acting like nothing happened and there hasn't been a statement. And so companies need to realize that staying silent is not working. And the millennials especially, they want to know where companies stand. You know, where are you on social issues? How many people like this have you hired? What are you doing with the environment? And so these things are important, and you have access now. A long time ago, we really didn't know. But nowadays we have access to look at the record, the voting record, to look at the hiring record. And, you know, you don't want to be playing defense because now your brand is damaged. So take a stand, be smart about it, be authentic about it, but don't be silent, because the reality is bad things happen when good people say nothing. And you have to stand up. And I would have so much more respect for a company that stood up. And it doesn't have to be explicit, but you have to acknowledge what's going on, how it's impacting people, and how that aligns with your values. Once again, we talked about the values or what's written on the wall. If you say you value all employees' voices, if something happened to stifle those voices, you should speak up.
I love it. I almost want to just jump up and amen and shout. You are on it. You are on fire. Good afternoon to Maisha, to Laval. If you have any questions, please let us know. Any comments? But I just want to ask you this. If we take a look at it from the customer's perspective, and one of the things that I noticed two things, but one of the things that I noticed is that almost immediately, once something happens and it's all over the news, the company is like, well, we're going to start working on our diversity. So then they start working on it. But the second thing is that there's usually a call for a boycott. You know, it's like hit them in the pockets, don't buy their merchandise. Looking at it from both sides, are you one of those people that necessarily recommend a boycott, not boycott? Like, what are your thoughts on that? How do you recommend some of the best ways to work together from the customer and the company side?
I think it really depends on where you are. And unfortunately, some people don't have the courage or the wherewithal to stick with the boycott. But I do think economic impact gets companies more than anything, because it has to do with the bottom line. And if it's something that's impacting the bottom line, they take notice. Now, brand is important too now. So brand damage or economic impact makes companies think about what makes sense. And I really think it depends on the company's reputation. And I'll use Starbucks again. Because Starbucks had been one of the leaders in stepping out and having courage and dealing with race issues, you really didn't hear a call for a boycott. And quite frankly, I would not have boycotted, because a lot of the work that their leader did, who, by the way, is now of considering running for president, he started Race to the Top. I mean, he really was at the forefront of, let's have these conversations about race. So it wasn't like they were just reacting, right? As compared to other companies who, you know, just the way they treat people, they continue to have these faux pas, they have these EEOC suits, things of that nature, and you don't think they're changing. I think you vote with your feet, right? I mean, if I have 5 companies I can buy from, and you are doing things that seem to be counter to inclusivity, then I'm not going to patronize you. So I think it depends on you as a person, but I do think there are times that when something is so disrespectful that you have to respond in a way that lets people know it's not okay, and we will choose differently.
I love it. Now, Deloria, we are coming down to the last few minutes of the show. Actually, I'm not sure, but I think we went over a little bit, but I was having such a great time and learning so much, and the information that you were sharing, I really feel that my viewers definitely need to hear. Now, what I like to do with the last few minutes of the show is just allow my guests the opportunity to speak directly to the viewers and let them know what you want them to take away from your interview. So I'll go ahead and give you the floor for a few moments.
Sure. And I'm going to shift a little bit, because for me, it's about not just the companies, but about the individuals. And if you look at my website, people will say, well, you got to find your niche, and it should just be corporate America, because that's who has the money. But my thing is, good corporations are made up of great people. And so for me, it was important for me to say, yes, I will help companies, but I also still want to help individuals. Companies have limited budgets. And so you may not be considered a high potential at that company, but you may have high potential. So for me, I do coaching of career coaching. I help individuals with exit strategies. Sometimes you know it's not working and you need to figure out how the heck to get out of there and start over again. But what I want people to realize is that you are valuable. You have great talent. And if you're at a company that doesn't recognize it, it doesn't have anything to do with you. It means you're at the wrong place. And like what you said, take that skill and go somewhere else. But figure out yourself. It's hard to be authentic when you don't know who you are. So take some time for introspection. Find out who you are. Find out what your strengths are. What environments do you work well in? And create your brand. And know yourself so well that you can sell yourself and you're not acting. That you can say, for example, I know my brand is authenticity, positive energy, and courage. Everywhere I've worked for the last 20 years, if you ask people about me, they're going to say, oh, she's very authentic, she's pretty courageous, and she has positive energy. Learn that and use that. And if you're in the wrong spot, it's not a big deal. Sometimes you learn what you want to do by learning what you're not supposed to do. And no one that's successful gets there one after success after success. It's lots of failures. But as long as you learn from those, then they're just, things that are helping you. And we all plant seeds, to your point. You're not going to be a millionaire overnight, but plant seeds, be authentic, reach back, help people. If you ever get into a position where you can help people, like I said, when people are at the table, a seat at the table is not made for us to sit. It's made for us to stand up, scoot over, and make room for other people. So give back, volunteer, but figure out who you are and be true to that authentic voice. And if you're true to yourself, then you can never be a disappointment and you will always be successful.
Amen, amen, amen. I love it. That was so wonderful. Please, Deloria, please give our viewers your website address again. We are going to put it in the comments, but just let people know where they can find you.
Absolutely. It's www.acesolutionsgroup.com, acesolutionsgroup.com. And I kind of laughed at it because I thought about ACE as it's the acronyms for authentic. But if you think about ACE, I got my little card here, you can't lose when you have a deck stacked with aces. So it's right. About of being authentic, but it's also about having the courage. So I would also say, have the courage to speak up. If you see your company that you care about is about to make a big faux pas, don't say, girl, I'm not going to say anything, because the last time I said it, just kind of have the courage and be yourself. People will appreciate you for being yourself. And you can be a unicorn among horses and get a lot of respect and feel good about yourself. It's about being transparent. And, I've really enjoyed this time. Feel free to send me an email. My email is Deloria Nelson at acesolutionsgroup.com. I'm happy to help people individually or corporations. It's what I was meant to do. And people say, well, why did you leave where you were? I felt like I needed to let my light shine in multiple places, right? When you're in one corporation, you're helping that one corporation. But I really felt like my light needs to be in multiple corporations and that I could do so much more. So that's what I'm doing. I'm planting seeds. The company is maybe about 6 months old, but things are going well and I'm patient and I know that I'm authentic. And so it'll all come to fruition. It takes time. But patience is a virtue, and a dream delayed is not denied. Just keep pushing for what you want to do, and it'll all come to fruition.
Amen. And we are here to help you. That's what we do here on Ask Sharifah. We make sure that we put the full force of our network, our team, and everything we're doing behind positive, authentic, courageous people such as yourself. So I want to thank you for being a guest on today's episode of Ask Sharifah.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You are so welcome. And to all our viewers, I have to thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for just being you. And as always, I ask that you go ahead and share this interview, because friends don't let friends miss out on Ask Sharifah. And if you're interested in watching more of my interviews or to be a guest, visit my website at AskSharifah.com. Until then, everyone have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.